I'm Isabella Rossi, 32, a designer at Mason Orlia, a pride of Milan's fashion scene. My new collection was supposed to be the turning point, the thing that would take me from obscurity to a name everyone in fashion would chase. But days before the show, Marco Venturi, the creative director who'd run dry of ideas and feared being toppled, decided to steal it. He slapped his name on every piece, strolled out under the lights, and took the applause as if he'd earned it. As for me, in a single night the career I'd bought with years of sweat and sleepless nights collapsed. My reputation was crushed. The worst part wasn't that the collection was stolen, but that I had to stand in the wings, powerless, while the world hailed a man who'd worn my work like a mask and claimed it as his own. Marco forgot one thing: he could steal the spotlight, but he couldn't steal the truth. I have the original sketches registered with copyright, the source files still backed up on our systems, the emails he left behind when he slipped into the servers. Every trace is waiting to be exposed. He thought I would break and disappear. But his betrayal gave me every reason to bring him down. I have the evidence. I have the truth. And when that truth is finally revealed, the one who's dragged off the runway will be him. I carried myself with the natural elegance of someone who had lived long enough to collect a few bruises, yet still kept her faith in beauty. People often said my eyes seemed to focus on invisible patterns even while I was speaking. It was true. My mind was always mapping threads, colors, and rhythms that no one else could see. I grew up in Florence, surrounded by cathedrals and frescoes, but what captured me most as a child were the quiet little details of hand-woven tablecloths my grandmother used during Sunday meals. While the adults argued about politics and the wine, I would run my fingers over the slightly uneven surface of the cloth, fascinated by how every bump and knot told a story. That obsession with fabric followed me. At school, I ignored most of the standard career advice. I was supposed to become a lawyer or a banker like my cousins. Instead, I haunted flea markets for vintage textiles and begged old tailors to let me watch them work. By the time I was 20, I had become an apprentice in a small workshop in Milan, where the master craftsman Matteo Rixai taught me how to respect each fiber as if it had a pulse. Matteo was in his 60s then, a wiry man with calloused hands and a dry sense of humor. He liked to joke that he had spilled more coffee on fabric than most young designers had ever cut. One night in that workshop, Matteo told me something that stayed with me forever. He said, "You can buy inspiration at any art store, but patience cannot be purchased. Patience is the loom itself." I nodded then, but did not really understand until later when I was left alone with yards of stubborn wool that refused to bend to my design. After hours of frustration, I remembered his words and slowed down. I breathed with the fabric instead of forcing it. That was the beginning of my true education. By 32, I had built a reputation inside Mason Orlia, a high-end fashion house that prided itself on theatrical runway shows and opulent marketing. I was not the face of the company that belonged to the charismatic creative director Marco Venturi, but inside the design rooms people knew who brought the real fire. I had a gift for creating woven patterns that looked modern yet rooted in centuries of culture. My notebooks were filled with sketches inspired by mosaics I photographed in small Mediterranean churches, by Asian brush paintings I discovered in dusty libraries, by fragments of folk songs my grandmother hummed while cooking. I believed that fashion could honor memory without becoming a museum piece. I often stayed late in the studio with my assistant Lena Nguyen. Lena was 10 years younger, Vietnamese-born but raised in Paris, and possessed a speed and wit that kept me from collapsing under pressure. The two of us developed an easy rhythm. I would spread my sketches across the table, pointing to curves and motifs while Lena translated them into digital patterns or helped cut early samples. We teased each other constantly. One evening, while testing a new jacquard weave, I said, "I want people to feel the heartbeat of this fabric." Lena laughed and replied, "If I hear a heartbeat from cloth, I am calling a doctor." I grinned, "But you know what I mean. Clothes should breathe with us." Lena nodded seriously, "Yes, and that is why we work until midnight." Our conversations were often interrupted by Matteo, who visited the studio from time to time. Although officially retired, he could not resist dropping in to check on his former student. He would lean against the doorway holding a paper cup of espresso and observe in silence for a few minutes. Then he would remark with his usual dry humor, "The thread only sings when the hands are patient." I always smiled at that line, feeling like the young apprentice again. At the corporate level, though, things were different. Marco Venturi liked to keep attention on himself. He wore sharp suits, spoke in rehearsed soundbites, and collected awards with a practiced smile. To the outside world, he embodied the genius of Mason Orlia. Inside the design floor, he was known for borrowing ideas from others and presenting them as his own. I had learned to tread carefully around him. I believed that my work would eventually speak louder than politics. Still, I could not deny the small unease that crawled through me whenever Marco praised my designs with that detached tone. He would glance at a fabric swatch I spent weeks perfecting and say, "Interesting, perhaps we can use some of this for our upcoming collection." The words were framed as compliments, but they felt more like claims. Lena noticed me stiffen every time. She whispered once, "Be careful. His eyes look like they are already locking your ideas into his vault." Despite that undercurrent, I pushed forward. My upcoming collection was the most ambitious project I had ever attempted. I wanted to combine the geometry of Byzantine mosaics with the fluidity of Mediterranean waves. I drew patterns that linked together like stained glass yet shimmered like water. Every piece in the series was designed to connect with the next, forming a larger story across the runway. It was not just a collection of clothes. It was a tapestry of memory, migration, and renewal. Night after night, I sat at my desk under the soft yellow light, sketching arches, spirals, and interlocking lines. I experimented with natural dyes that created colors both vibrant and gentle. I worked with Matteo on the loom to test the strength of different fibers. I asked Lena to capture digital scans of my drafts, making sure every stage was recorded. I had learned to protect my work. Every sketch was dated, every fabric sample labeled, every step photographed. It was partly habit, partly instinct, and partly a quiet form of self-defense in a world where credit could vanish overnight. When asked why I cared so much, I once answered, "Because fabric is not just decoration. It is memory woven into thread. Each mistake I make on the loom tells me something about myself. And if that memory is stolen, then it is not only my career that is lost, but also the voice of everyone who taught me." My friends outside the fashion world often struggled to understand my intensity. During coffee gatherings, they teased me for always doodling patterns on napkins. I laughed along, but inside I felt different. I did not chase luxury or fame. I chased the quiet satisfaction of seeing a stranger wear something I had imagined and knowing that stranger felt more alive because of it. I lived in a modest apartment filled with rolls of fabric stacked in corners and sketchpads piled on the floor. The kitchen table was permanently covered with samples. Visitors had to move silk swatches aside before setting down a glass of wine. I liked it that way. My home was my archive. When Lena visited, she often joked, "One day you will trip over all this fabric and sue yourself." I would laugh and reply, "At least the evidence will be undeniable." Evenings were my sacred time. I would light a candle, play old jazz records, and continue sketching while the city outside settled into night. The hum of cars blended with the scratching of my pencil. Sometimes I spoke aloud to myself, rehearsing how a fabric should drape or how a color should shift under stage lights. It was a ritual of focus and hope. This was the portrait of me, Isabella Rossi, at 32. A woman shaped by patience and passion, a designer who lived not for applause but for the story within every thread. I carried with me the voices of my grandmother, my mentor Matteo, and the laughter of Lena, who kept me grounded. Around me swirled the bright but dangerous world of high fashion where brilliance and betrayal often walked hand in hand. I did not know yet that a storm was coming. I only knew that I was ready to keep weaving until my vision found its place. On a crisp autumn morning, I walked through the glass doors of Mason Orlia carrying a leather folder stuffed with sketches. The lobby smelled faintly of polished marble and expensive perfume. Assistants in black rushed past holding trays of coffee and garment bags. I greeted the receptionist with a warm smile and stepped into the elevator. My stomach tingled with both excitement and nerves. Today, I would present the latest stage of my collection to the internal review board. In the elevator, I closed my eyes for a moment and whispered to myself, "Remember the cloth. Remember patience." The doors opened, and I entered the design floor where long tables overflowed with fabric samples, mannequins, and half-sewn garments. The air was alive with the sound of scissors slicing and machines humming. Lena was already at our corner station, arranging swatches into neat rows. She looked up and grinned. "You're late, boss," I laughed. "Only 5 minutes. My bus was stuck behind a parade of schoolchildren." She replied, "I think that's a sign from the universe. Maybe you should design uniforms next." I shook my head with mock seriousness. "Never. Children deserve more freedom than uniforms allow." We bent over the sketches together. I explained how each motif connected with the next, pointing at a spiral that echoed a cathedral dome and then at a wave pattern that suggested the sea. Lena listened attentively, occasionally raising an eyebrow or suggesting a variation. Our collaboration was fluid, like two instruments improvising in the same key. Matteo appeared later that morning, wearing his usual tweed jacket and carrying a small box of pastries. He placed them on the table and said, "You will never win a fashion war on an empty stomach." I kissed his cheek. "You spoil us." He waved it off. "I only want to see what trouble you two are making today." We showed him the latest woven sample, a piece of silk shot through with golden threads forming a mosaic pattern. Matteo rubbed the fabric between his fingers and nodded slowly. "The density is good, it breathes." He looked at me with pride. "This is your voice. Do not let anyone talk you out of it." The presentation with the review board was less heartwarming. Marco sat at the head of the table, surrounded by assistants and executives. He wore a navy suit that gleamed under the lights. His expression was unreadable as I laid out my sketches and fabric swatches. I explained the concept, the cultural inspirations, the technical innovations, and even described how the collection told a story from first look to finale. When I finished, silence filled the room. Then Marco leaned back and said, "Fascinating. We might take some of these elements forward." I waited for him to elaborate, but he only smiled and moved to the next agenda item. The executives scribbled notes but offered no feedback. The meeting ended abruptly. Outside in the hallway, Lena whispered, "That felt strange," I sighed. "Yes, but we did our part, we keep building." Lena nodded, though her eyes carried worry. Weeks rolled by. I worked tirelessly. I registered each design with the Intellectual Property Office. I filed every sketch with timestamps. Sophia Conti, my lawyer friend from university, helped check the paperwork. Sophia specialized in creative rights and often reminded me, "Document everything." In this industry, memory is not enough. Proof is survival. I followed her advice to the letter. Meanwhile, Marco began appearing more frequently in the studio. He would stroll in, glance over my shoulder, and make vague comments. Sometimes he took photos with his phone without asking. Lena noticed and frowned. I tried to stay polite, but each intrusion felt heavier. One evening after Marco left, Lena muttered, "He looks at your work the way a thief looks at jewelry." I replied softly, "Then we must keep the locks strong." At night, my apartment grew even more crowded with fabric rolls and samples. I worked until my eyes blurred, yet I felt alive. Every new swatch was a heartbeat. Every sketch was a breath. I told myself that no matter what happened at the company, I would finish this collection. It was my story, and I would tell it. Friends invited me to dinners and parties, but I declined more often than not. They teased me, saying I was married to my loom. I laughed, but deep down, I knew they were right. Fashion was not just my career. It was my language, my way of translating the world. When I walked down the street, I did not simply see buildings and trees. I saw lines, textures, and patterns waiting to be transformed into fabric. One Sunday, I visited my grandmother in Florence. The old woman served pasta and poured wine, while I spread fabric samples on the kitchen table. She touched the cloth with wrinkled fingers and said, "You carry our history in these threads." I smiled with tears in my eyes. That was all the validation I needed. Back in Milan, the tension at Mason Orlia thickened. Rumors circulated that Marco was planning a grand collection that would redefine the brand. No one knew the details. I focused on my work, unaware that my own designs were slowly being pulled into that secret plan. I continued to meet with Matteo, who reminded me, "Do not rush, remember patience." I answered, "I know, but sometimes I feel the fabric is running faster than I can catch it." He chuckled. "That is when you must slow down even more." The portrait of my life grew sharper with each passing week. I balanced between inspiration and danger, between loyalty to my craft and the politics of my workplace. My heart remained pure, but shadows were gathering around me. I could sense them in the way Marco lingered too long over my sketches, in the sudden requests to share my full library of designs, in the mysterious glitches on the company server where some of my files disappeared. Yet I held on to my belief. I told Lena one night while we closed the studio, "If I keep my work honest and my records clear, then no one can truly steal it." Lena looked at me with concern. "I hope you are right." I whispered back, "I must be right. Otherwise, the whole idea of creation would collapse." One late evening, the city outside Mason Orlia had already gone quiet, but the design floor still glowed with scattered lamps. I sat alone at my table, sketching arches that curved into waves, my pencil moving in calm strokes. I paused when I heard footsteps. Marco entered without announcement. He walked around the table slowly, scanning the sketches. He reached out and lifted one swatch of fabric without asking. His tone was smooth, but his eyes were cold. "This is impressive, very fresh." I forced a polite smile. "Thank you." He placed the fabric back down and leaned closer. "You know, Dr. Lee, the company needs a strong identity. Your work could fit well, but it must serve the larger vision." I held my breath, feeling as if my ideas were being caged. "I understand." After he left, I sat frozen for a long while. Then I whispered to myself, "These threads are my voice. I will not let them be silenced." The next morning, Lena rushed in holding her tablet. "I checked the server logs again. Someone copied a full folder of your sketches last night." I looked stunned. "What time?" "Around 11:30, she replied. I felt a chill. That was exactly when Marco had been in the studio. I whispered, "Keep these screenshots safe. We may need them." In the days that followed, I worked with even greater intensity. I documented every single step, scanning each page, photographing every fabric sample, uploading backups to my personal archive. Sophia met me at a cafe to discuss strategy. The lawyer leaned forward and said, "You are right to be cautious. Intellectual property theft happens more than anyone admits, but you are in a good position. You have detailed proof." I nodded, my heart heavy. I never imagined I would need to defend my own creations like this. Sophia smiled gently. "Genius always attracts shadows. What matters is that you stay ready." Despite the undercurrents, I found moments of joy. One night, Lena stayed over at my apartment to help organize samples. We cooked pasta together, laughed at silly reality shows playing in the background, and then spread rolls of fabric across the living room floor. "You know," Lena said, "sometimes I think you are not a designer. You are a storyteller who uses thread instead of words." I smiled. That might be the nicest thing anyone has ever said to me. My grandmother called often, reminding me to eat and rest. I reassured her, but in truth, I slept little. I lived between excitement and dread, caught between the beauty of my designs and the fear of losing them. The city prepared for Fashion Week. Posters appeared, magazines buzzed with rumors. Marco gave interviews hinting at a revolutionary new collection that would honor tradition while pushing boundaries. I felt a sharp twist in my chest when I read his words. That was exactly how I had described my own vision. Lena threw the magazine on the table. "He is using your language," I answered softly. "Then we must be louder with the truth." One evening, Matteo visited again. He looked around my cluttered apartment filled with samples and smiled. "This place smells like fabric and hope." I hugged him. "I am glad you came." He studied my face and said, "You look tired." I confessed, "Sometimes I feel like I am standing on the edge of something. I do not know if it is triumph or disaster." Matteo placed a hand on my shoulder. "Every masterpiece is born on that edge. Trust yourself." That night, I wrote in my journal, "I am 32 years old. I have spent half my life learning the patience of thread. If the world tries to silence me, I will answer with proof, with community, with my own voice carried by fabric." The portrait of my life was almost complete. I was a woman of passion and discipline, a designer who carried history in her hands. Loved by my grandmother, supported by my mentor, partnered with my loyal assistant, and advised by my sharp lawyer friend. Around me, the industry shimmered with glamour, but behind the lights lurked betrayal. I did not yet know the storm would soon break, but I was already preparing the armor of patience and proof. In those final quiet days before everything collapsed, I often stood at my apartment window, holding a piece of woven silk to the light. I whispered, "Remember the cloth, remember patience." And in that whisper was all my hope, all my fear, and all my determination to stay true to myself, no matter what came next. The morning light in Milan came soft and golden through my apartment windows. Rolls of fabric lay scattered across the floor like sleeping animals, each with its own color and texture. I sat cross-legged on the rug sipping black coffee while flipping through a book of Byzantine mosaics. The tiny tiles in the photographs glimmered like frozen pieces of sunlight. I traced the patterns with my fingertip, whispering, if I could weave this rhythm into cloth, people would carry the memory of cathedrals on their skin. Lena arrived a little later carrying croissants in a paper bag. She kicked the door shut with her foot and called out, "Breakfast delivery." I smiled. "I hope you brought extra butter." Lena tossed me a croissant and sat down on the floor beside me. "What are we studying today, ancient churches again?" I laughed. "Always, but look at this arch. Imagine this curve as the line of a sleeve. Imagine the mosaic colors spread across silk." Lena studied the book, then the sketches on the table. "You are serious. You want to make clothes that look like architecture." I shook my head gently. "Not look like, feel like." I want someone to wear this and feel the echo of a dome over their shoulders, or the shimmer of sea water at their feet. Later that day, we met Matteo at his small workshop on the edge of the city. The space smelled of wood and oil, filled with looms that seemed older than time. Matteo greeted us with his usual gruff warmth. "What madness are you bringing me today, Ragas?" I laid my sketches on the workbench and explained how I wanted to combine mosaic geometry with Mediterranean wave patterns. Matteo rubbed his chin. "Tricky, but possible. We will need to choose fibers that catch light differently, maybe a silk-cotton blend." He picked up a thread spool and held it to the light. "The trick is to let the fibers argue with each other until they make peace." We spent hours testing combinations. Matteo guided my hands on the loom, showing me how to adjust tension. Lena recorded everything on her tablet, snapping photos of each attempt. At one point, I grew frustrated when the pattern collapsed. I muttered, "Maybe I am chasing something impossible." Matteo shook his head. "Impossible is just another word for not patient enough. Try again." Days turned into weeks. I built a library of motifs, spirals inspired by church domes, cross-hatched grids echoing tiled floors, fluid lines taken from sea waves, brushstroke patterns borrowed from Asian paintings I had studied in old books. Each motif carried history, but also my own interpretation. One evening, Lena and I sat on the balcony surrounded by fabric samples fluttering in the breeze. She asked, "Why are you so obsessed with old traditions?" I answered quietly, "Because they remind me that beauty survives time. Wars come, empires fall, but the pattern on a wall or the song in a grandmother's voice can live on. If I put that memory into fabric, maybe it will survive another century." Lena thought for a moment, then smiled. "That is heavy, but also kind of magical." I laughed. "Magic is just memory with a little patience." My grandmother became part of this process too. I visited Florence often, carrying samples to show. One afternoon, she placed her hands on a piece of indigo-dyed cotton. "The color is deep, like the sky before rain," she said. I nodded. "I want people to feel that calm before a storm when they wear it." My grandmother looked at me with pride. "You are weaving our stories." Meanwhile, Sophia, always practical, kept reminding me to register everything. One evening she called, "Inspiration is beautiful, but paperwork is protection. Promise me you are saving your drafts." I laughed. "You sound like a school teacher." Sophia replied, "Good, because when the wolves come, you will thank the teacher." The studio at Mason Orlaia became a living gallery. Walls covered in sketches, tables filled with swatches, mannequins dressed in half-finished garments. Assistants from other teams often wandered in, eyes wide. They whispered to each other about my new project. Word spread through the building that something special was happening. One afternoon, Marco walked in unannounced. He strolled around the room slowly, hands clasped behind his back. He examined a swatch, lifted a sleeve, nodded with calculated calm. "Fascinating," he murmured. "Very ambitious." I kept my tone polite. "Thank you." Marco leaned closer. "You know the brand must speak louder than any one voice. Keep that in mind." Then he walked out. As soon as he left, Lena whispered, "That man is a vulture." I forced a smile. Vultures only circle when something is alive. That means we are on the right path. The weeks leading up to Fashion Week were a blur. I poured myself into the collection. I experimented with natural dyes made from herbs and minerals, staying up late boiling pots in my kitchen. I tested how fabrics shifted under different lights, carrying samples into the sun, the street lamp, even candlelight. I wanted the designs to feel alive in every setting. Matteo watched me with pride. One night he told me, "You are no longer just my student. You are weaving in your own language now." I felt tears sting my eyes. "Thank you." I knew how much his approval meant. By the end of the season, I had created a full set of designs ready for development. Each piece was registered, cataloged, and photographed. I looked at the collection laid out before me and whispered, "This is the seed. From here the tree will grow." That night, I sat by my window with a candle burning low. I opened my journal and wrote, "Inspiration is a gift, but also a responsibility. If I forget the stories behind these patterns, they become decoration. But if I honor them, they become memory made visible. This is what I want my fashion to be." The design floor of Mason Orlaia looked like a battlefield disguised as a playground. Long tables stretched under bright white lamps, every inch covered with swatches, pins, scissors, spools of thread, and half-dressed mannequins. Assistants darted back and forth carrying garment bags, their footsteps blending with the hum of sewing machines. The air was filled with the mixed scents of fabric glue, hot irons, and perfume samples left from earlier meetings. I walked in early one morning, balancing a stack of sketchbooks against my hip. I loved this chaos more than any runway show. Here was where ideas became flesh. Here was where thread turned into voices. Lena was already at our station, hair tied up in a messy bun, her laptop open with design software running. She looked up, holding a roll of fabric. "Morning, boss. I rescued this before someone from accessories stole it." I laughed. "Good. That fabric is the heart of look number 5. We set to work pinning swatches on mannequins. I adjusted a sleeve while Lena stood back, tilting her head. "Too stiff," she said. I nodded. "Let's cut it on the bias." I grabbed scissors and snipped quickly. The fabric fell in softer lines. Better. A few minutes later, Matteo strolled in carrying his usual paper cup of espresso. He leaned against the doorframe, watching with an amused smile. "This room looks like a carnival for fabric." I kissed him on the cheek. "Every carnival needs a ringmaster." Matteo pointed at me. "And that is you." We showed him the latest woven sample, silk threaded with silver lines forming a mosaic pattern. Matteo rubbed it between his fingers, closed his eyes, then nodded. "It breathes. This is your true voice, Dr. Lee. Do not let anyone tell you otherwise." Before I could answer, a hush fell across the room. Marco had entered. He moved slowly, surveying the tables like a king inspecting his court. Assistants scrambled to clear space for him. He wore a tailored gray suit and carried himself with practiced authority. He stopped in front of my table. "What do we have here?" His voice was calm but carried weight. I straightened my shoulders. "These are the initial prototypes for the mosaic collection." I explained how each motif connected with the next, forming a narrative across the runway. Marco picked up a swatch, holding it to the light. "Interesting. Perhaps we can integrate some of these elements into the upcoming line." I replied carefully. "They work best as a system. Each design is meant to speak to the others." Marco smiled thinly. "We will see." He turned and walked away, leaving a silence behind him. Lena muttered under her breath, "That man has the charm of a locked safe." I whispered back, "Keep focus. We have work to do." That evening, my apartment felt colder than ever. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the box of sketches. Lena sat across from me, furious. "This is theft," she said. "They will use your work." I whispered, "I know." Lena slammed her fist on the table. "Then fight back." I buried my face in my hands. "My whole career, it's just ended. How do I fight a house like Oralia?" Lena leaned forward. "With the truth, with the proof you built. Remember all the registrations. Remember Sophia, you are not powerless." Later, Matteo called. His voice was heavy with anger. "They can dismiss you from their payroll, but they cannot dismiss your voice. Remember that." I hung up and sat in silence. Outside, the city lights flickered. Inside, the samples lay scattered like wounded soldiers. I whispered to myself, "This is not the end. This is the fall before I rise." Fashion Week arrived with its usual frenzy. The city's streets filled with black cars and flashing cameras. Billboards showed glossy images of Mason Oralia promising a groundbreaking new collection. Journalists whispered about a bold vision that would merge tradition with modernity. I read the headlines with a bitter taste in my mouth. That was my language. On the night of the show, I stayed in my apartment, but Lena insisted on streaming the runway live on her laptop. "Come on, boss. We need to see this with our own eyes." I hesitated, then nodded. The screen came alive with the sight of models striding down the runway under dramatic lighting. The first look appeared, a gown woven with geometric silver lines. My breath caught. It was my mosaic pattern, slightly altered but unmistakable. The audience gasped with admiration. Critics scribbled notes. Cameras flashed. Look number 3 shimmered with ocean wave motifs woven into silk. I whispered, "That is mine." Look number 7 carried sleeves shaped by the same dome-inspired curves I had sketched months ago. Look after look passed, each echoing my work. Lena clenched her fists. "They stole everything." I sat frozen, tears stinging my eyes. The collection I had poured my soul into was now paraded under Marco's name. At the show itself, Marco took the stage at the finale. He smiled confidently, waving to the audience. "Thank you for celebrating this new vision of Mason Oralia. We honor tradition and push forward into the future." The crowd applauded wildly. In the front row, Ava Morrow, a sharp-eyed journalist known for her honesty, leaned toward a colleague. She whispered, "These designs feel familiar. Haven't we seen patterns like this from Isabella Rossi?" The colleague shrugged. "Maybe inspiration travels." Ava frowned. "Maybe theft travels faster." The reviews poured in that night. Magazines declared the collection a triumph. Blogs praised Marco's genius. Social media buzzed with photos of the shimmering gowns. Yet amid the praise, a few voices began to question. Side-by-side comparisons appeared online. My prototypes shown during an earlier workshop matched against the runway looks. The similarities were too precise to ignore. I sat with Lena in the dim light of my apartment. The laptop pinged with notifications. Lena pointed. "Look, people are starting to notice." I whispered, "Maybe the truth can still find its way." Matteo called after watching the stream. His voice shook with anger. "Those are your patterns, every thread, every curve. The world must know." I answered softly, "Then we will show them." I looked at my stack of registered documents, the photos, the logs Lena had saved. Proof surrounded me. The show that was meant to erase me might become the very stage where I reclaimed my voice. That night, while the fashion world applauded Marco, I sat in silence, feeling pain but also a spark of resolve. I whispered to myself, "They think they silenced me. But I am still here." The morning after the big show, headlines screamed about the triumph of Mason Orlaia. Marco's photo appeared everywhere. His name was praised as visionary, bold, revolutionary. But beneath the roar of praise, a softer murmur began to rise. On fashion forums, users started posting side-by-side comparisons. One thread showed my mosaic fabric from a workshop months earlier placed next to Marco's runway gown. The caption read, "Spot the difference." The comments poured in, "Looks identical. This cannot be coincidence." On Instagram, a small account run by an independent stylist posted a carousel of my earlier sketches and the show's official photos. The stylist wrote, "These look a little too familiar." At a cafe across town, Ava Moro scrolled through her phone, her sharp eyes narrowing. She had attended the show and already felt the designs carried my voice. Now the online chatter confirmed her instincts. She whispered to herself, "Something is off." She dialed her editor. "I want to pitch a story." The editor groaned. "Everyone is writing about Orlaia right now." Ava's voice hardened. "Exactly, but no one is asking the right question. Who really designed this collection?" Meanwhile, I sat in my apartment surrounded by fabric rolls. Lena showed me the posts. "Look, people are defending you." I stared at the screen, tears welling. I thought my work was gone forever, but maybe the world is smarter than I believed. Matteo came by carrying bread and cheese. He placed them on the table and said, "You need strength." "The battle is only beginning." I smiled weakly. "Thank you." He scrolled through the comparisons on Lena's tablet and muttered, "Even blind judges could see this theft." That evening, Ava sent me a message on social media. She wrote, "I have questions about your past designs. Would you be willing to talk?" I hesitated, then typed back, "Yes." The next day we met at a quiet cafe. Ava placed her recorder on the table. "I need to know everything." I explained my process, showed her registered documents, pulled out samples. Ava listened carefully, her eyes sharp. "This is more than inspiration. This is appropriation." Back at the newsroom, Ava began drafting her article. She wrote about the uncanny similarities, the timeline of my work, the suspicious circumstances of my dismissal. She ended with a question: who truly owns the story Orlaia is selling? When the piece was published, it spread quickly. People shared it on Twitter and Instagram. Some dismissed it as gossip, but many found the evidence convincing. A tide of suspicion began to rise. In the comments sections of magazines, readers debated fiercely. One wrote, "I love the show, but if this is true, I cannot respect Orlaia anymore." Another said, "Designers deserve credit. Give Isabella her name back." Inside Orlaia headquarters, Marco slammed the article on his desk. He barked at his team, "Damage control immediately. Deny everything, call it coincidence." His assistants nodded nervously, but outside the glossy walls, the conversation had already shifted. What began as whispers now grew into a wave of suspicion rolling through the fashion world. I sat with Lena and Matteo that night, scrolling through the flood of messages. Lena whispered, "People are finally seeing it." Matteo added, "The truth has a way of weaving itself into the light." I looked at them, my voice steady. "Then it is time I speak louder." The night Ava's article went viral, I could not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, the glow of the screen lighting my tired face. Posts, comments, messages poured in. Some strangers encouraged me, others demanded proof. I whispered to myself, if they want proof, I will give them proof. At dawn, I brewed a pot of strong coffee, pulled out stacks of documents, and spread them across the table. Lena arrived soon after, eyes puffy from lack of sleep. "What are we doing?" she asked. I looked up with fire in my eyes. "We are going public." We spent the entire morning recording videos. I sat in front of my sketches and samples, explaining my process step by step. "This is the first draft, dated 6 months ago. Here is the registered copyright certificate. Here is the fabric sample woven on Matteo's loom." I held up receipts, photos, time-stamped files. My voice shook at first but grew stronger with each clip. Lena edited the footage quickly, adding side-by-side comparisons of my originals and Orlaya's runway looks. She uploaded the video to Instagram and YouTube with the caption, "My work, my story." Within hours, the post exploded. Thousands of shares, comments flooding in. Some wrote, "This is undeniable." Others demanded Orlaya respond. Matteo joined us that evening, watching the numbers climb. He said quietly, "The world is listening." I whispered, "Finally." Messages poured in from young designers thanking me for speaking out. One wrote, "You give us courage." Another said, "I was afraid to fight when my work was stolen. Now I see it as possible." I read each one with tears in my eyes. Then came the first official response. Orlaya released a statement claiming the similarities were coincidental, that their creative team worked independently, and that accusations were unfounded. Marco appeared in a glossy interview saying, "Inspiration travels. Ideas are shared. There is no ownership of tradition." I slammed my laptop shut. Lena fumed, "He is twisting everything." Matteo muttered, "Cowards always hide behind vague words." I took a deep breath. "Then we show more." I posted additional evidence, videos of me working on the loom, drafts with corrections, photos with dates visible, testimony from Matteo as a witness. Each post strengthened my case. Ava published a follow-up article citing my evidence, interviewing experts who confirmed the technical details. One textile historian wrote, "The weave structure is too specific to be coincidence." The momentum grew. Hashtags appeared, "Justice for Isabella, credit the designer." Celebrities reposted my story. Fashion students rallied behind me. One evening, I went live on Instagram. My voice was calm but firm. "I am not against inspiration. I am against theft. Every thread in my designs carries memory, culture, and months of labor. No corporation should erase that." The live stream drew tens of thousands of viewers. Lena read the comments out loud. "They believe you, they stand with you." I smiled faintly. Then this is no longer just my fight. As the stream ended, I looked at Matteo and Lena. I whispered, "I thought losing my job was the end. But maybe it was the beginning of something bigger." The days after my live stream felt like a storm of voices. Some shouted in anger at Orlaya, others whispered gratitude to me for daring to speak. Messages poured into my inbox faster than I could read them. One morning, while Lena and I sat hunched over my kitchen table answering messages, the phone rang. Lena picked it up, listened for a second, and her eyes widened. "It's Matteo. He says we should come to his workshop right away." When we arrived, Matteo was waiting with several younger weavers. He looked at me with fierce pride. "These are my students. They want to testify that they saw your fabrics being woven months ago." A young woman stepped forward. "I helped set the loom that day. I still have photos on my phone." I felt tears prick my eyes. "Thank you." Later that afternoon, we met Ava at her office. The journalist had stacks of notes pinned across her desk. She waved us over. "Look, I have interviews with independent designers who confirm they saw your prototypes at a private showing last spring. Their accounts match your timeline exactly." Ava leaned closer, her voice low. "You are not alone anymore. People admire you, they want to stand with you." That night I scrolled through social media. A famous model posted, "I wore Isabella's fabric at a fitting months ago. I knew then it was special." Credit where credit is due. A respected fashion critic tweeted, "Orlaya has explaining to do. The evidence is overwhelming." Sophia, my lawyer friend, called with updates. "I have colleagues who are willing to act as expert witnesses." And Isabella, I am telling you, the public opinion is already shifting in your favor. You need to stay steady. I whispered, "I never imagined people would fight for me." Sophia answered, "They are not just fighting for you. They are fighting for fairness in an industry that has silenced too many." In the middle of this whirlwind, Rafael Ortega, the CEO of rival brand Vespera Atelier, requested a meeting. I hesitated. Lena urged me, "Hear him out. It might be important." We met at a quiet restaurant. Rafael was tall, charismatic, but his voice was calm and sincere. He leaned forward across the table. "Isabella, the world already knows your genius. What you need is a platform that protects you. Work with me. Vespera will give you full control, full credit, your name on the label, your vision untouched." I studied him carefully. "Why would you take this risk?" Rafael smiled faintly. "Because true innovation is rare. And because Orlaya's arrogance is my opportunity." I sat back, my heart pounding. For the first time in weeks, I felt possibility instead of fear. When I returned home, Lena asked, "So what did he say?" I answered softly, "He offered me freedom." Matteo grinned. "Then maybe it is time you stop lending your voice to others and start singing your own song." That night, I opened my journal and wrote, "Allies have appeared. This is no longer only my fight, it is our fight. And together, we will be louder than any empire." The meeting with Raphael left me restless. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling while Lena slept on the couch after another long day of sorting files. A rival brand offering me freedom, resources, and my own name on the label, it felt impossible yet real. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Raphael himself. "Think about what we discussed. I am ready when you are." I showed the message to Lena over breakfast. Her eyes widened. "He is serious," I nodded slowly. "Too serious. This could change everything." Later that day, we met Raphael again, this time at Vespera Atelier's headquarters. The building was bright and modern, filled with glass walls and open workspaces. Unlike Oralia's polished marble halls, this place hummed with energy. Young designers moved freely, laughing, sketching, experimenting. I felt something stir inside me. This was what creativity should look like. Raphael welcomed me warmly. He led me into a conference room with bolts of fabric displayed like art. He gestured around. "This could be yours. You will have a dedicated team, access to the best looms, freedom to collaborate with artisans around the world. And most importantly, full authorship. Your name will be front and center." I asked cautiously, "What do you expect in return?" Raphael smiled. "Excellence, integrity, innovation, and maybe revenge against Oralia, though I do not need to say that out loud." Lena whispered, "This sounds like a dream." I looked at Raphael. "If I accept, how soon could I start?" Raphael leaned forward. "Immediately. The industry is watching. If you launch a collection now, people will listen." Matteo, who had joined us for the meeting, crossed his arms thoughtfully. "Resources are important, but respect is more important. Will you let her control every detail?" Raphael nodded firmly. "Yes, she decides everything." I felt my chest tighten with both fear and excitement. After months of being silenced, the thought of freedom was intoxicating. I whispered, "I need time." Raphael replied, "Take the weekend, then come back to me." That evening, Lena, Matteo, and I sat in my apartment surrounded by fabric swatches. Lena was practically bouncing with excitement. "This is it, boss. This is your chance to start fresh, to prove to everyone that Oralia cannot silence you." Matteo sipped his wine and said, "Opportunity is a loom. You decide if you thread it." I looked at the fabric samples scattered across the table. I remembered my grandmother's words, "You carry our history in these threads." I closed my eyes and imagined my name on a label, my story walking down a runway without being stolen. Finally, I whispered, "Maybe this is the path I was meant to take all along." The decision came slowly but firmly. I would not only create a new collection with Vespera, I would also take Oralia to court. The thought frightened me. Fighting a fashion empire was like standing in front of a storm with only a thread in my hands, but I remembered Sophia's words, "Proof is survival," and I had proof stacked higher than fabric rolls in my apartment. One rainy afternoon, Lena and I carried 2 heavy boxes into Sophia's law office. Sophia looked up from her desk and raised her eyebrows. "I hope those are croissants." I smiled faintly. "Evidence." Sophia pushed aside her laptop. "Even better." We opened the boxes and spread out sketches, swatches, printed emails, and hard drives. Lena explained the server logs she had saved, showing unusual access to my files at midnight. I laid out the registration certificates in chronological order. Sophia moved from pile to pile, her sharp lawyer eyes scanning quickly. She finally leaned back in her chair and nodded. "This is strong, very strong. With this chain of evidence, Oralia will not be able to deny your authorship." She looked at me. "But you must be ready. They will fight dirty. They will call you bitter, disloyal, even crazy." My jaw tightened. "Let them. I have the truth." Over the next weeks, we worked tirelessly. Sophia drafted legal complaints, gathering testimony from Matteo, who signed affidavits confirming he had woven the early prototypes with me. Several young weavers from his workshop agreed to testify too. Ava offered to share her reporting, providing context about my dismissal and the suspicious timing of Oralia's collection. One evening in the office, Sophia asked me, "Are you sure you want to go public with this lawsuit now? The publicity will be intense." I looked at her without hesitation. "They stole my voice. I want it back." Meanwhile, Raphael checked in often, encouraging me. He told me, "The industry needs you to fight. Your courage will protect others too. We will support you, whatever you need." I felt grateful, though sometimes overwhelmed by the weight of expectation. Late at night, after long sessions with Sophia, I would sit at my window with tea, staring at the city lights. I whispered to myself, "This is not just about me. This is about every designer who lost their work to someone louder." The day we filed the lawsuit, I walked into the courthouse with Sophia at my side, Lena and Mateo following close behind. The cameras flashed outside. Reporters shouted questions. How much are you seeking in damages? Do you think you can win? I paused at the steps and spoke clearly. This is not about money, this is about truth. The headlines blazed that night. Former Oralia designer sues for copyright infringement. Some called me brave, others reckless. But one thing was certain, the battle had officially begun. At home that evening, I opened my journal and wrote, I have taken the first step. My proof is my shield. My allies are my strength. Let the courtroom be my runway now. When I first stepped into the space Raphael had arranged for me, I felt my breath catch. The studio was wide and filled with light from tall windows. The walls were white, the tables clean, the air smelled faintly of fresh wood and cotton. For a moment I just stood in the doorway, taking it all in. After months of fear and betrayal, here was a place that felt like possibility. Raphael walked beside me with a smile. This is your new home, fill it with your vision. I turned to him. And you are sure I can run this however I want? He nodded. It is yours, no boardroom politics, no creative director looming over your shoulder, just you, your team, and your imagination. Lena rushed in behind us, carrying a box of my old fabric samples. She looked around with wide eyes. This is paradise, I laughed. No, this is work, hard work, but the good kind. Over the following weeks, the empty space transformed. I brought in looms and cutting tables. Mateo arrived with crates of thread and tools. His eyes softened when he saw the room. This smells of promise, he said. He touched the wood of one loom. Strong, it will hold your voice. Young artisans came from all over to join the team. Some were students, some were experienced weavers tired of being invisible in big companies. I welcomed them all. I gathered them on the first day and said, here every piece you make will carry your name. No one is anonymous. If you weave a pattern, you will be credited. If you cut a shape, your signature will be remembered. The artisans exchanged glances, surprised and moved. One young man said, I have never had a boss say that. I smiled. That is because I am not a boss, I am a partner. Here's part 6, continuing in first person as Dr. Vivian Lee. Days in the new workshop became joyful chaos. Music played in the background, laughter echoed through the room. Fabric samples lined the walls. I moved from table to table, guiding, encouraging, sometimes rolling up my sleeves to cut or weave myself. Lena kept track of digital files and organized the schedule. Mateo taught the younger weavers the discipline of patience. One afternoon, while I adjusted a sleeve on a mannequin, Lena said, do you realize you are building more than clothes? You are building a family. I paused, looked around the buzzing workshop, and nodded. Maybe that is exactly what I always wanted. Outside the workshop, the lawsuit against Oralia grew louder. Headlines debated the case, social media buzzed with updates. But inside the studio, I focused on creation. I experimented with natural dyes from herbs and flowers, boiling them in big pots until the air smelled of lavender and sage. I tested new cuts using 3D models. I cast models of different shapes, sizes, and backgrounds, insisting the runway should reflect the real world. One evening, after a long day, I stood with Mateo at the doorway, watching the team still working with enthusiasm. He said quietly, you see, you fell, but now you rise higher. I whispered, this time no one can steal my voice. Later that night, I wrote in my journal, a workshop is more than a building. It is a place where stories breathe. Here we are weaving not just fabric, but freedom. The night of the debut show for my independent brand arrived with the energy of a storm and the tenderness of a prayer. Weeks of preparation had turned the once empty studio into a collection of pieces that carried not only fabric and thread, but the voices of every person who had touched them. Backstage was alive with the nervous excitement of models slipping into gowns, makeup artists adding final touches, and assistants running with pins in their mouths. Lena directed the chaos with a clipboard in hand, her voice sharp but encouraging. Everyone breathe. We are not saving lives, just showing them. Well, actually, maybe we are saving lives because this is going to change everything. I stood quietly near the curtain, watching my creations shimmer under the lights. My hands trembled, not from fear but from awe. Mateo came up beside me, holding a small charm of wood and thread. He pressed it into my palm. For luck and for memory. I closed my fingers around it. Thank you. The lights dimmed. The music began, soft at first like waves rolling on a shore. The first model stepped onto the runway. The gown glowed under the spotlight, woven with silk that shifted colors as she moved. The audience leaned forward. Look after look followed. Dresses inspired by cathedral domes, coats lined with wave-like patterns, blouses shimmering with mosaic shapes. Each piece flowed into the next, telling a story of history reborn in fabric. The models walked like carriers of memory, each stride a beat of my heart. In the front row, Ava scribbled notes furiously. Her eyes shone. She whispered to the critic beside her, "This is not just fashion, this is testimony." The critic nodded slowly. "It feels alive." At one point, a model spun under the lights and the fabric revealed hidden colors, shades that only appeared in motion. The crowd gasped. Phones flashed, capturing the magic. Backstage, Lena grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that? That sound is for you." I blinked back tears. "No, it is for us." As the finale approached, I sent out a model wearing a gown that combined every motif: mosaic lines, wave curves, dome shapes, brushstroke textures. It was a tapestry of all the pieces woven together. The audience erupted into applause before the model even reached the end of the runway. When the show ended, the music faded, and the models lined up, the spotlight shifted. The announcer's voice rang out, presenting the debut collection of Vivian Leigh. The crowd rose to their feet. Applause thundered. I stepped onto the runway slowly, my hands trembling. For a moment I froze, overwhelmed by the noise, the lights, the sea of faces. Then I saw Lena cheering, Matteo smiling proudly, Ava nodding with respect, and Raphael clapping with a wide grin. I took a deep breath and bowed. The applause grew louder, rolling through the hall like a wave. Tears blurred my vision. In that moment, I felt the weight of my fall, the pain of betrayal, the fear of losing everything. But I also felt the strength of my allies, the proof I had built, the courage that had carried me here. Later backstage, reporters swarmed me. "How does it feel to have such a triumphant debut?" I smiled through tears. "It feels like breathing again." That night, social media exploded. Hashtags like Vivian Leigh Reborn and Truth on the Runway trended worldwide. Critics praised the collection as bold, poetic, and deeply human. One review read, "Vivian Leigh has turned pain into power. Her runway is a resurrection." At home, exhausted but glowing, I sat with Lena and Matteo around my kitchen table, eating leftover pizza from the after-party. Lena raised her glass of soda. "To the rebirth," Matteo added, "and to the fabric that carries memory." I lifted my glass. "To freedom." H I letter 1EC3 U R letter 1ED3 I. Toy S letter 1EBD CH letter 1EC9 CHUY letter 1EC3 and Sangoy TH letter 1E9 NH letter 1E5T. G I letter 1EF and Guyern T letter 1EB and G cow CH letter 1EF. S letter 1EF1 KI letter 1EC7 and VAT TH letter 1E9 T letter 1EF1. Kongtherm B letter 1EDBT Haythay Distroke letter 1ED5 I Jai V letter 1EC1 N letter 1ED9 I Dung. D letter 1B0 letter 1EDB I de la T I letter 1EBF PPH letter 1E7N T I letter 1EBF PCO. B letter 1EAFT Distroke letter 1EA7 U T letter 1EB C letter 1E3NH Toa on Vabi letter 1EB1 and G Ngoy TH letter 1E9 NH letter 1E5T. The courthouse smelled faintly of old wood and paper. Reporters crowded the steps outside, cameras flashing, microphones thrust toward me as I arrived with Sophia at my side. Lena and Matteo walked just behind, carrying folders of evidence. Questions rained down. "Do you think you can beat Oralia? How much are you suing for? Did Marco steal your work?" I paused at the steps, my voice calm but firm. "This is not about money. This is about truth." Then I walked inside. The courtroom was packed. Lawyers shuffled papers, journalists filled the gallery, curious onlookers whispered. At the front, Marco sat with Oralia's legal team, his posture arrogant, his suit flawless. He glanced at me with a smirk as if daring me to try. I met his eyes without blinking. The judge entered. All rose. The proceedings began. Oralia's lawyers spoke first. They painted me as a disgruntled former employee, claiming I sought attention and profit. One attorney declared, "The designs in question are inspired by common cultural motifs. No one can claim exclusive ownership of tradition." Marco nodded solemnly, as if he were the victim. Then Sophia rose. Her voice was steady, sharp as a blade. "We agree that inspiration is shared, but theft is not inspiration. What we will show today is not coincidence. It is a chain of creation that belongs solely to Vivian Leigh." She called the first witness, Matteo. He walked to the stand, his back straight, his hands rough from decades at the loom. He testified how he had woven the prototypes with me months before Oralia's collection. He described details only a weaver could know, the exact tension of the threads, the dye mixtures. He held up fabric samples signed and dated. The courtroom leaned forward. Next came Lena. She produced server logs showing midnight access to my folders under administrator credentials. She explained how she had captured screenshots and preserved them. Orlaya's lawyer tried to dismiss her as just an assistant, but she answered firmly, "Assistants see everything, and I saw files vanish." Sophia then presented the timeline: sketches dated, registered copyrights, receipts for fabric and dye, photographs with metadata. Each step lined up, building a fortress of proof. Finally, I took the stand. I spoke about my grandmother's influence, my years of apprenticeship, my vision for the collection. I held up my original sketches and explained each motif: the domes, the waves, the mosaics. My voice trembled at first, then grew steady. These are not just patterns, they are memories woven into fabric. To see them stolen and paraded without my name was to feel erased. The courtroom was silent. Even the judge leaned forward. When cross-examined, Orlaya's lawyer pressed me. "Are you saying no one else in the world could possibly design something similar?" I looked directly at Marco. "I am saying no one else could design it with my exact errors, my exact corrections, my exact sequence of drafts. Coincidence does not replicate a journey." The gallery murmured in agreement. Marco finally took the stand. He tried to charm the court, speaking of inspiration, of shared cultural heritage. But under Sophia's questioning, he stumbled. She showed him an email he had sent requesting my full library of designs. She compared timestamps of my drafts with Orlaya's final collection. Marco's confident smile began to crack. By the end of the week, the evidence was overwhelming. My chain of creation was airtight. The judge looked out over the courtroom and delivered the verdict. "This court finds in favor of the plaintiff, Vivian Lee. The court recognizes her as the rightful creator of the designs in question. Orlaya is ordered to cease use of the disputed works and pay damages in recognition of both financial and reputational harm." Gasps filled the room. Marco slumped in his chair, his empire crumbling around him. Reporters rushed to the phones. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. Lena squeezed my hand. Matteo whispered, "Justice weaves slowly, but it weaves strong." Outside on the courthouse steps, microphones flashed again. I spoke clearly. "This is not just my victory. This is a victory for every artist, every designer, every voice that was ever stolen. Proof matters, courage matters, and no one can erase your story if you fight to keep it alive." The crowd erupted in applause. For the first time in months, I felt truly free. The news spread across the fashion world like wildfire. Vivian Lee wins landmark copyright case against Mason Orlaya. Headlines appeared in every major paper. Television anchors debated the impact on the industry. Social media was flooded with celebration. In the days following the verdict, Orlaya's reputation crumbled. Several stockholders withdrew support. Buyers canceled orders. Influencers who once praised the brand posted videos throwing Orlaya garments into trash bins. One viral clip showed a young designer saying, "This is what happens when you steal from us." Marco avoided the press. Rumors swirled that he was suspended pending an internal investigation. The once untouchable creative director was suddenly silent, his smile absent from magazines. Meanwhile, I became a symbol of resilience. Journalists called me the voice of fairness in fashion. Students wrote essays about my courage. At panel discussions, critics spoke of a new era where intellectual property would finally be respected. One evening, Lena, Matteo, and I gathered in my apartment. Pizza boxes and wine glasses covered the table. Lena scrolled through her phone, laughing. "Look at this." Someone started a hashtag woven by Vivian. Thousands of people are posting pictures of their clothes with captions about giving credit to creators. I smiled softly. That made me happier than any courtroom win. Matteo lifted his glass. "To justice, to patience." I clinked my glass. "To the people who believed." Sophia joined us later, carrying a folder. She opened it with a grin. "Here it is, the official judgment and the compensation package." I glanced at the numbers and gasped. "This is enormous." Sophia nodded. "You deserve every cent and more, but I know you will not just keep it." My eyes shone. "I want to use part of this money to create a fund, a foundation to protect young designers, to teach them how to document their work, to give them legal resources. No one should feel as helpless as I once did." Lena clapped her hands. "Yes, call it the Thread of Truth Fund." Matteo chuckled. "Whatever the name, it will be a lifeline." Within weeks, the fund was launched. Applications poured in. Young designers from across the world wrote letters thanking me for giving them hope. Some said they had nearly quit after being copied by larger companies. Others admitted they finally felt seen. At the same time, my independent brand soared. The Rebirth runway show had already captured hearts, but after the verdict, demand skyrocketed. Orders came from boutiques in Paris, New York, Tokyo. Celebrities requested custom pieces. My studio became a hive of activity, buzzing with laughter and determination. One afternoon, walking through the new workshop, I paused to watch the young artisans weaving at their looms. Each piece carried a tag with the name of the maker. I smiled. No one here is invisible. That evening, Raphael visited, congratulating me. You have changed the conversation, Vivian. Brands are nervous now. They know they cannot get away with what Oralia tried. I looked at him with gratitude. Thank you for giving me space to rise again. He shook his head. You rose on your own. Months later, when Oralia tried to stage a comeback, the reception was icy. Their stores sat empty. Their shows were boycotted. The fashion world had turned its back. The empire that once dismissed me now struggled to survive. On the anniversary of my victory, I stood on a stage at a design school, speaking to a hall full of students. I held up a piece of fabric from my collection. Remember this, I told them. Creativity is fragile, protect it, document it, fight for it, but never stop creating. The students erupted in applause. In that moment, I knew my story had traveled further than any runway. Later, writing in my journal, I put it simply, the verdict gave me justice. The aftermath gave me purpose. Months had passed since the verdict, but the echoes of my victory were still alive in every corner of the fashion world. My name had become more than a label. It had become a symbol of courage, persistence, and integrity. My independent brand thrived. Collections sold out within weeks. My studio was filled with laughter, music, and the steady rhythm of weaving looms. Young artisans worked side by side with seasoned masters, their names proudly displayed on every garment tag. For me, this was the truest triumph, not the money, not the fame, but the fact that every voice in my workshop was heard. One quiet morning, I sat with my grandmother in Florence. Sunlight filtered through lace curtains, landing on the table where cups of coffee steamed. She touched one of my fabrics and smiled. You carried our stories into the world. I knew you would. I leaned close and whispered, I could not have done it without your songs and your cloth. Later that week, I gave a speech at an international fashion conference. The hall was packed with designers, students, and journalists. I stood on stage, simple and calm, wearing a jacket I had woven myself. I spoke from my heart. I learned that creativity without protection can be fragile, but when we protect it with care and courage, it becomes unstoppable. My story was painful, yes, but it taught me patience, discipline, and the importance of allies. I paused, scanning the room. Do not let anyone erase you. Write your name on your work, guard it, and share it proudly. The audience erupted into applause. Some people had tears in their eyes. Students rushed up afterward to thank me, telling me I had given them strength to keep going. Back at my workshop, I often gathered my team at the end of the day. We would sit among fabric rolls, sipping tea, talking not just about designs, but about life. I told them, fashion is not only about clothes. It is about carrying memory, telling stories, honoring those who came before us. If we stay true to that, no one can take it from us. Matteo, leaning against the loom, would add with a smile, and remember, patience makes the thread strong. Lena would grin, and backups make the evidence stronger. Laughter filled the room. One night, as the workshop lights dimmed and everyone left, I stayed behind. I walked slowly through the rows of mannequins dressed in my latest designs. I touched the fabrics gently, as if greeting old friends. At the window, I looked out over the city, alive with lights, and whispered to myself, they tried to silence me. But they only taught me how to speak louder. I opened my journal one last time and wrote, creativity is not a competition of theft, it is a garden of light. And every time we protect our seeds, water them with patience, and share them with courage, the garden grows brighter for everyone. I closed the journal, smiled, and turned off the light. The workshop rested, but my story had already woven itself into the fabric of the world.